I'd like to commence with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation from whose lands this event is being broadcast today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands where you are joining us from today, and feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you would like to do so. Our guest today is Eugen Bacon. Eugen is an African-Australian author. She's a British Fantasy and Forward Indies Award winner, a twice World Fantasy Award finalist, and a finalist in other awards, including the Shirley Jackson, the Philip K. Dick, and the Victorian Premier's Literary Award, as well as the Nomo Awards for Speculative Fiction by Africans. Eugen was announced in the honour list of the Otherwise Fellowships for doing exciting work in gender and speculative fiction. Danged Black Thing made the Otherwise Award honour list as a sharp collection of Afro-Surrealist work. She's also the 2024 recipient of the University of Tasmania's Hedberg Writer-in-Residence Fellowship. And finally, she is the mentor for Writing New South Wales' Cultivate Mentorship for emerging writers from diverse backgrounds. Eugene, welcome.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And to begin, I am speaking to you from Melbourne, and I would also like to acknowledge the First Nations and traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I am a daughter of the Wajita people of Tanzania, and this is now my home country.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so let's begin. Now, you've said in a lot of previous interviews that you knew you had to write from an early age. Why was that? And what was it like writing as a very young person?
That's a really interesting question. So the African culture is very rich in storytelling. You have the oral storytelling where you sit around the fire or your grandma tells you stories, and you have riddles and proverbs and songs and dance. And that really cultivated my passion. And I normally share this bit where my grandmother lived in a village on Lake Victoria. And when I went to visit her, if I was naughty, instead of her, giving me the spanking that I deserved, she would go like, let me tell you the story of the naughty hyena and what happened to her hind legs. And so that really cultivated that desire. And then also I realized that normally sometimes I'm feeling something, but I don't know what it is until I write it down. And so writing became a way of me to express my curiosity and also to discover myself.
Right. You're very well known for writing in the speculative fantasy horror genre. Is this an outgrowth of those early stories that you were told?
A little bit, like when you think of those the stories that I grew up reading and listening to, the how and why stories, how the hyena got the hind legs, or how the zebra got her stripes, or how the tortoise got his shell. This is speculative in a way, but when I started writing, it was usually literary writing. I loved literary fiction. I loved the poeticity and the rhythm of the writing because it mirrored my own rhythm. I like rhythm in the dance and rhythm in songs. So reading a story to me, all that was important. But then I slowly slipped into speculative fiction because I realized that there's so much scope to it. Speculative fiction is such a safe space in which to write. You can address a lot of themes, sometimes even in a subversive way, in a non-threatening way. It's a comfortable space where you can write anything. Nobody needs to ask what color is my character, what language do they speak. They could be any color you want. They could speak any language, and all it meant was just how robust your world building was and how you brought that immersion and brought the reader along the journey with you.
Yeah. You also credit your father for being a great reader. Was he sort of your first book club member almost?
I wish he was alive. So he passed away really young. My father was just 55 when he died. And to this day, I still, his memory lingers. And I've written stories. One of my stories in Dung Black Thing is called Swimming with Daddy. And my father was very well traveled for his time. And so he saw Miriam Makeba perform. He saw, like Stevie Wonder and, the Bonnie M and Pointer Sisters, and he loved his Irish coffee. So he was really well traveled, and he understood that I loved reading so much. And so when I did well in school, he would buy me a book, and that's how the how and why stories, began. I wish he was alive today because I think he would have been very proud of where I am now, and especially as a storyteller. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Speaking of where you are now, when did you sort of begin to understand as a young person writing that this was going to actually be your profession?
Yeah, it's one of those funny questions because I never knew that I would be a professional writer. I knew that I loved writing. I knew that I expressed myself the best when I was writing. If I sent you a letter, it really was like it was a story. And it was only years ago when I was a young mother. I just had my son, and I'm not very good at twiddling my fingers. So during my maternity leave, I took a course with the Writers Bureau in which they sent you assignments and you wrote whatever it was and sent it back to them. Then they had a competition and I wrote this story and it won the competition. And to this day, I still remember I got £50. It was my first paid money as a writer. But even then, writing was potluck. I was getting shortlisted in competitions like in the Tarala Short Story Award. I remember I was third place, but it still didn't get me anywhere until I did a writing course, my Masters of Writing at Swinburne, and slowly part of my writing portfolio, I would write like short stories or excerpts, and I could submit those to literary journals. And slowly I started getting published. And so slowly building up that portfolio really helped. But even then, I didn't really become a professional writer until, sometimes events happen. And right now I'm writing full time, which just, it's what I've always wanted. But I've always juggled writing with a day job, as many writers do. Yeah.
Yeah, which picks up on a question that one of our audience members, Lucy, sort of gave to us when she joined, is that you're now a professional writer and you're doing it full time, but you mentioned that you had to juggle work, parenting, just having a life. What's your process as a writer now, and how has it changed over the years?
I have always been very disciplined. I'm very focused. Like I'm the kind of person, I finished my PhD in 2.5 years and I had 4 years to finish it. And my supervisor, Dominic Heck, later became a very good friend of mine. And because we have the same work ethics. And so I approached my writing with passion. And I remember initially, I really used to hate having a day job. I didn't like it at all because in my mind, it was keeping me away from the writing. And then slowly, I actually began to appreciate it because there's so much in the everyday. Like sometimes writing dialogue, you have to listen to how people talk. There's stories all around us. You meet people, you meet different kinds of characters. And then also, I realized that the day job actually pays for my writing. I could go to events, I could network with other writers, I could buy my author copies, I could submit my work to competitions. And so I began to appreciate it and to love whatever it was. And I learned to compartmentalize. I could put myself into the day job and be fully focused, be present in that moment. But at the same time, you're listening to everything you're observing, because as a writer, you're doing research all the time. I could write in my head or I could scribble little notes until I got a moment to sit and write. And I'm not the kind of writer who needs like 2 hours, knowing that I have 3 hours to write. I know how to steal moments to be able to write. And because that is what sometimes you have moments in time. Yeah.
Yeah. You know how to steal moments. That's a really interesting thing. Do you have any tips on how do you get to yourself to that space where you can just, you've got say 10, 15 minutes and you can just sort of like swivel and focus that 10, 15 minutes just on your writing?
I am such an immersive writer, and I'm also a very immersive reader. So in those 10, 15 minutes, I can actually immerse myself into that moment in time where I become the character, I become the story. And what I do, like, just think of it, in any story, you can actually break down your story into vignettes. So a vignette could be a moment of dialogue between a mother and a daughter. And in those 15 minutes, I could really immerse myself into that dialogue, be the mother, be the daughter, feel whatever it is. Or sometimes the moment in time could be just the character. I am thinking about the character, I am fleshing the character, I am becoming the character. And slowly those little moments sum up to something bigger. So even in a novel, a chapter could be your moment in time, or a particular scene where something happens that could be your moment in time. And just slowly by slowly, we have a Swahili saying that says, haba na haba hujaza kibaba, little by little we'll fill the pot. And so that's how I get my writing done. And people always say, you're so prolific. Like, honestly, this is my quietest year. I have just 2 books out. There are years where I'd have like 4 books out. There's one I had 6 books out. So how does it happen? It's just the little by little. And then sometimes your projects come to fruition all at once. Like, I'm not a good procrastinator. I hate deadlines. Tell me you need something in November, you will get it in August, because it niggles in my head. It's so bothersome. I have to get it out of the way.
Instead, I sort of, I think I overgilded the Lydia that said earlier that you just write, because you're not just a writer, you're also taking on roles of editing. What was it like moving from being a writer to being an editor?
Yeah, I realize that I have an eye. I can look at something and immediately see how it can be a better version of itself. And it's also with my own writing. I hate the first draft. Usually after the first draft, I'm in despair. I look at it and like, this is rubbish. No one will ever look at this. Oh my gosh, I hate it already. And then it's the refinement when I come back to it and I look at it and I can already see what can improve it. And I found that also with other people's writing. And so when I see a short story, people call me the passive speech police. I can smell passive speech a mile away. Like, I just look at it and I can see already, this needs to be active. The dialogue, I just look at it and this is plastic. I can see already what you can do so much with it. And then also working with journals. I was an editor with Andromeda Spaceways magazine. And so I would choose stories, like people would submit, and there would be a submission folder. And then out of those, looking at the stories, I could see the potential in them. And the stories that spoke to me loudest are the ones that I chose. And I'm also a reviews editor of Aurealis, and I have a large team, about 12 reviewers. And when they send in their reviews, I can look at the reviews and I can see how they can be sharper. And normally, as an editor, the best thing is to write the shape of whatever it is. Like, don't try to insert yourself into the work. And so to respect the voice of the writer, but then you can already see how much stronger the work could be, like a better version of itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Has editing the work of others changed you as a writer?
In a way, it has taught me restraint, not to try to immerse myself into other people's writing, and only because I've had that happen to me, where at the end of the editing, you look at the work and you hate it because you cannot see a piece of yourself in it anymore. And several times I have withdrawn my work because the editing was just so intrusive. And one of the things I say to new writers is never sell your soul. Like, be true to yourself, be able to understand the edits. Not every editor and not every mentor is the right one for you. You need to have the right one for you. You need to have somebody who respects your work and somebody who will be able to work with whatever you have while preserving your voice to bring out the best intent of the work.
How do you judge if an editor is right for you? What sort of steps might potential writers take when they're being edited for the first time or being offered an editor for the first time?
Yeah, I think sometimes listen to your gut. How does it feel when you read the feedback? Does it feel like something that makes you feel excited to get back into the work because you can see already what you can do to polish that rough stone into a diamond? Or when you read the feedback, does it feel so alien, like this is not you? Are they asking you to do something that is not you? And this is where conversation is really important, having that dialogue. Like sometimes you have a power imbalance where you feel that the editor has so much power over you. And much as you hate whatever it is they're proposing, you'll go with it only because you want to get published. And at the end of the day, I don't think you'll feel very proud about that piece of work, because every time you read it, you will see that this is not your work. This is somebody else's work. You have editors who I call them the wannabe writer editors. And so suddenly they want to take your work and write their story. And you have to be very wary of those ones because they can absolutely destroy you.
Yeah, so Samia from the audience, she asked a question that was connected to mentorship, but I think I might bring it up now. Um, those sort of processes that you're talking about there, they're during the editing process. Is there something you can do? Are there some questions you could ask editors before you get into that process that might give you some information as to whether or not they're right for you?
Not especially, but sometimes you can send them a sample. You can give them a sample of your work and just see what sort of feedback they give you. My editors have usually been, it's a trust relationship. So it's people who I've worked with them once and I really value their feedback. And I am very loyal. I've been with Vodafone like, oh my gosh, maybe 15, 20 years. Like if I am loyal, I stay with you. And so I had an editor for almost 10 years and I was really distressed when they retired. And they recommended somebody and I sent them one piece of work and the feedback just didn't work with me. It felt so alien. So I went looking for somebody else who I'd worked with before and that worked. And so Scott van der Valk is an editor at Borealis and he's one of my trusted editors because the feedback that he gives me, I can see that he's looking at it from a worldview and it's somebody who understands my voice. And so whatever feedback, sometimes I'll look at something and it doesn't really work for me. But most of the times it's about knowing yourself and knowing what works for you. And then it's taking what do you say? Picking the beauty and leaving the chaff. Not everything will work for you, even with the editors who are your trusted editors, because they see something differently and writing and reading is subjective. And I think once you have that intimate understanding of yourself and your writing, and once you're comfortable with what it is that you're writing, you'll just see that you'll know. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So I wrote a novel and I thought it was finished. And like I was literally ready to start sending it out. And one of the publishers who I've been talking to across almost like for months, sometimes it's building that relationship. And the editor wanted to have a chat. And I felt really honored that they wanted to give me that feedback personally. And the feedback that they gave me really excited me. It's somebody I've never worked with, but it's somebody I trust in the industry. And they were not trying to change who I am or to change the nature of my writing. But the feedback was so, I could see how it could make the work a better version of itself. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to dig back into the work. And so it's how you feel at the end of the feedback. Like if you feel it's not working for you, then maybe it's not the right feedback for you.
Wow. And is that a skill as an editor you've had to develop, or did it come very naturally, this way of giving excitement back to the writer without being that sort of an oppressive presence coming down upon them?
Yeah, I think it comes naturally to me a little bit because in the Chinese horoscope, I am a pig and the pig is a giver. I am naturally a giver, and I've actually taught myself to be able to receive. I'm the kind of person who would find it really difficult accepting gifts. And so that comes naturally to me. I can look at something and be very excited about it. And also because I teach writing and I teach editing, and I also teach online writing. And so when I look at something, I have this natural excitement. I have seen works that you wish you had written it yourself, like it's so beautiful. And I am also an editor who receives stories for anthologies. And so that excitement is there. And I've worked as a judge as well for competitions. When I see a certain story, like there's certain stories that talk to you, and it comes back to that subjectivity. Some things work for you, some don't. But I naturally can see what I can do to work with the author to be able to bring the work to its best form. And even the feedback, how you give it, it has to be respectful. And you make it as suggestions, as recommendations, like, would you perhaps consider, or what do you think about this? Not like write this in passive or write this in, just do this and do that. Like it has to be that trust relationship.
Yes. Now, you're, of course, the mentor for our Cultivate Mentorship for emerging writers from diverse backgrounds. Do you see an essential difference between mentoring and editing, or are they essentially the same?
I think there are two levels of it. With editing, you're focusing mostly on the work. It doesn't really matter too much about the relationship that you have with the recipient. It's really about the text. Whereas I think mentoring goes another level, because then it's really about a connection. It's really about really harnessing that trust relationship. And it's also understanding the mentor, the mentee, what level are they at, and being able to work with them at their level without overwhelming them, but also to be able to work with them to bring whatever it is to another level. And I enjoy it very much because I'm always curious about people. And so part of the process of selecting a mentee, I love to have a connection with their work, but I also like to feel that connection with the individual, because then it's you can work together to build something in a trust relationship.
Yeah. What else is exciting you about taking part in this mentorship?
Oh, when I did it last year, I loved so much the diversity of the writers. We had authors with Australian heritage, Bangladeshi heritage, Chinese heritage, First Nations heritage, Indonesian, Japanese, Javanese, Malaysian, and then also the diversity of it. Like one of the things when I was selecting the works, I asked myself, like, how do I approach this? Do I look for a mentee whose work I feel that I connect with? Or do I look for the work that I feel has potential? Or do I look for the work that I feel, oh my God, this really needs a band-aid? And so at the end of the day, it's almost like a mixture of all that. But that connection is really important, mostly because personally, I am quite an immersive writer and an immersive reader. So I need to connect with that. And then also in my life, I have had so many opportunities where people I hardly knew, reached out to me and gave me opportunities. My first publisher, Meerkat Press, was one such individual, and also my PhD supervisor, Dominic Heck. I remember one of the very first advice that Dominic Heck said to me was, just be published or die. Like, just like she was really encouraging, like she really got me to be able to publish a lot of my works and to submit to journals and to keep me active. And Meerkat Press, that publisher, they fell in love with my work so much because they saw the potential of it. This was my novel, Claiming Timor. And to this day, and that was published in 2019. And to this day, if you say anything bad about Claiming Timo, the publisher Trisha will look for you and punch you in the face. Like, she loves it so much. So you need somebody who will be your champion. You need to have somebody who's your warrior. And so working with the mentees, when I look at their works, I'm like a warrior for them because I can see so much potential in it. And it excites me when some of them write back and say, you know, this was published here or this was shortlisted somewhere. That's just the most amazing feeling.
Yes, one of the aspects of the Cultivate mentorship is helping them to prepare a work to be submitted to a journal. How can emerging writers, you know, especially those from diverse backgrounds, best position themselves and their work to actually be considered for publication in journals or anthologies?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice that I ever got that was really valuable and that I would tell my younger self is edit, edit, edit. Like, don't be impatient. And sometimes you only get one shot. And so you could send something, and if you send something that is not the best version of itself, maybe that is the only opportunity you get. And so when you submit something, make sure it's the best version that you're able to prepare. And it also means having your trusted readers. And it doesn't mean, like, you know, giving the work to your partner and they say, oh, it's great. Then, you know, scrutinize it, like have somebody who will give you constructive feedback. So what's great about it and what do you think didn't work about it? And writers groups are really good, but even those, you need to make sure that you choose the right group for you. Like a writer's circle can also have people who are really thorns and they hardly see anything good about anything. You don't want somebody who will, you know, kill you as an author. You want somebody who will help you to work with whatever you have to become a better version of itself. Yeah, so I'd propose, you know, edit, edit, edit. If you can have a trusted editor or a trusted peer reviewer, sometimes it takes a few tries to know who works for you. And sometimes you need to have multiple people because they'll give you feedback differently across different things. And then also submit your work to competitions. Look at reviews, who is publishing what. Do your research, your due diligence, like don't just submit anything anywhere. I always say never keep a shrine of rejections. And so if a certain publication has a history of really rejecting lots of people, or they're so elite and they only publish certain people, then why send it to them? Like place yourself, gear yourself for success. Yeah, but always edit, edit, edit. Send your work, the best version of it, anywhere, because sometimes that's the only chance you have.
Yeah, so you're talking about really knowing, I suppose, the literary landscape, who is publishing what and who, and not wasting your time. But in a previous conversation, you also spoke about not exactly a scattergun, but not just submitting a work once, submitting it to every journal that is appropriate. Is that still something that you think about?
Think of it like when you're applying for a job, sometimes it's a numbers game and you're increasing the odds, the probability of you being published when multiple publishers are looking at it. And that's why I don't really like publishers who say, you know, no simultaneous submissions, and then they sit on your work for 10 months. Like, how do they expect you to wait for 10 months while they're sitting on it? Whereas others allow you to do the simultaneous submissions and you'd have the courtesy to come back to them if it's accepted elsewhere. So do your due diligence. Like initially when I started, I would send something to 5, 7 publishers at a time. And if one rejected it, then I looked for another one to fill in the gap. And that really increased the odds of my being published. And yeah, you have to keep your eyes open and just submit widely, and also enter as many competitions as you can. Just keep your eyes open. And what really helped me also was the networking. Like, there are writing communities that really help you to know what is available. So like being part of Writing New South Wales, being part of, Writers Victoria, being on Facebook groups or writing organizations, they get to tell you who is looking for submissions, who is open at this point in time, what competitions are available, and sometimes even being published in their own in-house publications. That just opens out your opportunities.
Are there particular journals or anthologies that you might recommend?
I know things like Mascara Literary Review is quite good. Last year, one of my mentees got published in Mascara Literary Review. The AWP Meniscus, that's the Australasian Association of Writing Programs, has a journal called Meniscus, and usually the university linked journals tend to be really good because it means that they're open to experimental work. They're usually quite flexible. And my own journey towards being published was through such journals, the ones that were scholarly linked, and they'd be really open. They love literary work, and they'd be open to anything experimental. And that just really helped. And then if you're looking in speculative fiction, being part of, say, speculative fiction organizations, like you have in Australia, you have the Australian Horror Writers Association. In Canberra, you have a really strong writing organization. Sometimes you can be part of global organizations, like I'm a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, and you get to know about lots of different opportunities, and that's where the networking comes in. And then on Facebook, just sometimes you're scrolling and you see, oh, somebody's open for submissions, and it's such a strong community. You discover so many things that you wouldn't normally have time to look at.
It's a really strong focus that you've got on the business of being a writer, isn't it?
Yes, it is important. And I think part of the passion that I have, but also when with writing, it's about quality. It's about really getting out there and really building that community, building that name. And I still, even now, I'm still on a journey. I don't feel that I'm quite there. I'm still entrenching that and getting better every day. They say, like, I feel sometimes that I'm as good as my last work. Like, imposter syndrome always comes in, like when you're working on something, and especially after that first draft, and I look at it and I know it's rubbish. And then, you put in the work because, as I said, like sometimes all you get is that one chance. People will remember you, and also you don't know who's noticing. And so you could be in the short list or the long list of a competition. You don't know who is noticing.
Yeah. Okay, so you've written a piece, you've edited, you have gone over the landscape and you've picked out 4 or 5 journals that you want to submit to. A few of the audience members have asked, how do you then grab the attention of the publisher? What can you do? You've put in the submission. How do you grab their attention? Is there like a cover letter format that you like to follow? What is it that you do to really, when you were starting off, to get yourself noticed?
Most of the publishers would have like a submissions portal, and any good publisher will have guidelines. And also be very careful when you're looking at publishers and their guidelines. Sometimes just the tone of the guidelines will tell you the nature of the publisher, the personality of that publisher. If the publisher has like a rule book and they say, they're telling you the do's and the don'ts very specifically, you know that this is a fussy publisher, and sometimes probably better stay away from them. And then sometimes you can look at the guidelines, and they're fun to read. Like, it's a website that you could linger on because it's so personal and it's so encouraging, but also they're specific in a good way. And so look at the submission guidelines because they're really important. If the publisher says no more than 5,000 words, then no more than 5,000 words. Like if they say, you know, whatever the word count limit is, if they prefer Times New Roman, it won't kill you to change your manuscript to Times New Roman. And so some of them actually have automated processes. Like as I am a reader for Aurealis as well, and the submissions is a little bit automated, where if something doesn't adhere to the guidelines, it will be instantly rejected before a human even looks at it. And so you need to be careful about things like that. Like just follow the submission guidelines. And then usually less is more. Don't say too much in your cover letter, but Australians are different from Americans because Americans are really about me, it's about success. I have done this and I'm so good at this and I am the best one. But, you know, sometimes you need to teach yourself to put those credentials up front. So if you have been, you know, shortlisted in a competition, if you have been awarded a mentorship previously, if you have been published somewhere previously, so bring those things that are publication related to show that, you know, you do have something in your portfolio. Just bring that up in your cover letter. You could just include a bio, like the very first thing, like keep refreshing your bio, keep looking at your bio. How current is it? What does it include? If somebody looks at your bio and they can already see your achievements, then that's really great. And your bio would be part of the cover letter. But less is always more. Just let the work do the work. Like just once you submit it to them, you have followed their guidelines. That's great. Yeah.
Is that something that you find in the people that you edit and mentor, that they're very sort of shy of their success?
Or a lot of them, yeah. People don't really recognize that, like sometimes they're really surprised when I give them feedback. Like you read something and it's just at the next level. Like you can already see something has so much in it, the potential in it. And that's why it's always good to give people feedback. Like if you see something that stands out. And so it's also like I think I understand myself. I understand my writing. I can look at something and I know the quality of it. And so try to become intimate that way with your writing. And sometimes it means also look at the writers that you admire, that you love. And when I write something, I think of Toni Morrison, who I am crazy about. I think of Peter Temple, who writes the most amazing dialogue. I think of Anthony Dua, who's an American writer who writes in such a beautiful way. I think of, you know, like Andrew McGahan or, you know, all these writers. And it's almost like I'm asking them, just have a look at this. So I ask myself, what would Toni Morrison think of this? Or what would Peter Temple think of this dialogue? And so compare your work and read as much as you can. You can't be insular about your writing because you're not going to see the blind spots. And so the more you read, and especially the more you read your favorite authors, and the more open you are, look at the award winners, but not always the award winners, because award winning can be subjective. Look at the works that talk to you and compare those with your writing, because then you can see, like, and never send the first draft. Like sometimes I look at the first draft, not mine, somebody else sends it. And I'm thinking, if you couldn't give it a second read, why do you think I would want to read it? Like it's so bad. So if it was so bad for you, why would I want to read it? And so just send the best version that you can. Yeah. And just read, and find your trusted readers.
Yeah, so just a reminder before we go any further that for people in the audience, if you do want to ask Eugen a question, just pop it into the chat box and we will hopefully have time to get to it. What you were just talking about sort of does pick up on something that I think Shah has already asked, and Sarah, is how do you deal with that writer's block? You've already sort of mentioned starting to read, and when you're in the depths of drafting and you start to feel lost or experience self-doubt, how do you bring yourself out of that?
Yeah, I think sometimes just look for the things that excite you, the creative things. Like I would watch a movie, I'd go to like an artwork movie, or I would read my favorite writers. Sometimes they're the strongest muse. I could pick up Toni Morrison and just begin on the first chapter, and already I can see a story beginning to form. I could read Peter Temple and the dialogue, just something like I write on a like the muse, you don't know when the muse will talk to you. The biggest writer's block that I ever experienced was years ago when I was going through separation and divorce. And the writer's block was not because of the separation and divorce, but because of the custody battle. So my son was only 4.5 years then, and it was really nasty. There was a restraining order against me. And there were times when I never thought I'd ever see my son again. And I had to fight for him, life and death. And as a migrant, I didn't have any support in this country. And so I could see that, I was the odd one out. I just didn't fit in. So I was the one that, people were suspicious about. And so I couldn't be a good mother. And so that really shook me. Even when I got my son back on shared custody, I couldn't write for 2 years. There was nothing. And I didn't force myself. I just let it. Sometimes you just leave it until the muse talks to you. And after 2 years, one day a story just came to my mind, and I wrote the story. And I remember being so emotional about it because I never thought I'd write again. 2 years is a long time not to write. And you just never know. Sometimes writer's block comes because of grief, but also grief works differently. So like years ago again, when my sister Flora died of AIDS, the very first thing that I wanted to do was to write. And I wrote a story that made me realize that I was so angry. I was really angry that Flora had let herself die. And, sometimes like you just don't know. But if you experience writer's block for whichever reason, just do all those things that excite you creatively, whether it's a film, whether it's reading a writer who just really excites you. Sometimes just go small, whether it's writing little vignettes, keeping a journal, you could keep a diary, like just keep yourself engaged creatively. You could just be walking around a park looking at the flowers and suddenly a story just comes to you. Yeah.
Yeah, you've mentioned it's very interesting about how your state of mind needs to be there in order for you to write. And even you being such a person, as you've already described, that you can sort of really micro focus when the time comes, but there's still that bigger care that you need to take care of. A couple of people have asked about submitting for journals and for writing short stories. That you have spoken about how writing short stories can be an excellent way of leading yourself towards writing a novel. And they're looking to see a little bit more about that. What can you say about that process?
Yeah, they're two very different kinds of writing. And there are people sometimes who think that writing a short story is practice for a novel. I would say to them, stuff that. Like, I love being a short story writer. The short story works to me in a different way because with a short story, you can be quite experimental with your writing. It's flexible, it's a moment in time. It's such an intimate way of writing in its own way. And it's also about restraint because less is always more. You can build a character in a single sentence in a short story. And what can work in moving from a short story to a writer, one of the processes that I use is I actually hide little stories in my novel. And so the first chapter could actually be a story on its own. It has its own beginning, its middle, and its end, and which is why my novels can be very intense. It's almost like they have that intensity of the short story all across the novel, but it's because I hide those little stories. Even your character could be a short story or an event, like just like you break it down into little vignettes, but you also carry the merits of one thing into another. And so as a short story writer, I carry that immediacy, that flexibility, that experimentation into the novel. Then from the novel, I bring that research into the short story. And so I can thoroughly research something, and it's not to put it into the story, but it guides the story, because at the back of your mind, you have your character so fully realized and you know where it's going. And, like I write nonfiction. And in the same way, the creative writing in the short story goes into my nonfiction, and I write it creatively. So you'll never read something from me, even the book that's coming from Bloomsbury. It's called Afro-Centered Futurisms in Our Speculative Fiction, with different chapters from different African writers. It's such an exciting book because it's not, all snobby, like all on the nose, like it's not scholarly at all. It's a fun, creative work. And so you can transfer those strengths from one form of work into the other. Like I write prose poetry as well, and sometimes a part of a story could begin as a prose poem, and then suddenly I see how it can grow and become a story. And so it's really like, it helps to write across forms, and it also helps to write across genres, because each of those informs the other.
So you seem to think you're very sort of quite loose in the way that you approach any particular work, that it's not the end until it's the end almost.
Almost, yeah, yeah. And sometimes, like my stories talk to me. I know that it's finished when the story stops talking to me. Like sometimes I lose sleep over it. I could be up at 2 a.m. Like I have to scribble it down because the story just has something more I have to add on to it. And sometimes when I send work to my editors, they know to wait, because they'll get another email that says, stop, press this version. So sometimes the work keeps talking to you, and you can see how it gets better and better. But then it reaches a point, like even now when I read my novels or I read a short story, one of my short stories, I don't look at it and say, oh, bugger that, I could have done better, or I could have written this way. Like, it's finished. I look at it and I know that it's finished, because it reached that point where it just stopped talking to me, like it was just completing itself.
It's a beautiful metaphor that your stories just keep sort of talking to you. How many how many works would you have sort of chattering away to you at any particular moment?
Well, I have this novel that, the editor gave me amazing feedback on, and it is dying to come out. And then I'm in a position at the moment, which is a fortunate position, where people invite me to write for anthologies. And so I have like 5 or 6 stories that I need to write, all across different things. One is like an Afrocentric Western, another is something totally different, another is about the psychology of monsters. And so sometimes I just let them sit until a story begins, like I say, talking to me. And especially the ones where you're solicited to write something based on somebody else's muse. And because I'm an immersive writer, if I don't feel it, I don't write it. And so I leave it, I let it simmer. And I could just be taking a walk around the gardens, and suddenly the story just begins shaping itself. And so I let them just take that way. So I am pregnant with 5 stories at the moment, and a novel and a novella.
Another wonderful metaphor. You've obviously written and you've spoken a lot about your background and your experience as an African Australian woman.
Yeah.
Um, what particular advice would you have for writers of diverse backgrounds who are looking towards being published for the first time?
Yeah, I would say be true to yourself, like write your truth. And like, I know that when I write, my writing is a curiosity. I write something that is really pressing to come out. And initially, when I started writing, I was writing for white people. And I think it's because I hadn't discovered myself yet. I could see it in my characters. They were blue-eyed and they had long hair and they were really skinny. But once I started writing Black people stories, it was almost like discovering myself, and I could begin to see myself in the stories. And in so doing, it actually it helped me be comfortable with myself. Like initially, I was trying to be African, trying to be Australian, and I learned that why can't I be both? And even without thinking it, my stories are becoming naturally African Australian. Like the characters have this African lingo and they have this Aussie lingo. It just comes out, and it just write your truth, and also look out for editors who will try to diminish who you are. Like, sometimes they will ask that you change something. And it is important that your work is accessible. And so sometimes I read like even Afrocentric works where there's a dialect and I don't understand it, and I am African. So if I don't understand it, how do you expect other people to understand it? But you can contextualize your way in such a way that you're inviting people to understand your culture, you're inviting people to understand your characters, but you're also making it accessible and they can understand it. Yeah. So I'd say just be true to yourself and just like have that dialogue with whichever editor. Look at the things they're asking you to change and just know how does it feel in your gut? Does it feel that they're asking you to be different, not true to yourself? Or are they asking you to do something that will make your work a little bit more accessible? So like writing is you're welcome, you're inviting other people into that one's personal space, because once you finish writing, it's out of your hands. You don't know how the reader is going to receive it.
Yes. And Iris asks, which is very connected, how does this, what advice do you have for people who working and living in Australia whose English is not their first language?
Yeah, well, English is not my first language either. And like sometimes I think in Swahili first. And like, have you noticed when you watch the Read Me movies, the foreign ones, like you really love how the words come out, the ways of saying. And so listen to those ways of saying, even if you're translating something from your traditional language, your dialect, and then into English, just maintain that way of saying to keep it, uniquely authentic. It's your truth. It's how you say it, and that is fine. Like just listen to your writing, like just how it comes out. But also it helps having those trusted mentors, because if I send something to my trusted editors and they say, I didn't understand this part, can you flesh it out a little bit more? And then you're able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of what you're saying talks about being confident as a writer, and confident as a person. Is that something that you've always been confident, or did you have to almost teach yourself that?
It's not so much confidence as in knowing yourself. I think I've always been very intuitive in that I try to understand myself. And sometimes I don't know what it is that I am thinking or feeling until, I start writing and it comes out. And so the more you allow yourself to be comfortable with who you are, it comes out in the writing as well. Like you need to trust in your text. There's a reason that it's coming out as it is. And so just to be able to have that ear, and sometimes it takes a while. Like I look at some of my past works and I wish I could hide them somewhere, burn them somewhere. Like I have works on Amazon that I would love nobody to ever read. But when you start, like that's how it is. Like you're experimenting, you're discovering yourself anew, and each work is different from the other. And we all develop differently. So what I wrote last year might be different from what I'm writing this year. Like we evolve constantly as humans. We're so complex, and it depends on the events in your life, whatever it is that you're surrounded with. Just it all, as writer, we steal from the everyday, and it has a way of impacting you in different ways. Things that you're passionate about, like I'm passionate about climate change. I'm passionate about motherhood. I'm passionate about, like a social justice, social injustice. So you just, whatever it is that is urging you to write, just listen to it.
Yes. Okay. Questions are flooding in, but I think we really have time for one more, and it's from Lucy. Do you have any advice for a writer who's recently being hired as an editor or is thinking of taking up an editorial position?
Ah,
Uh,
what advice would I give? I just say, just really make sure that you don't immerse yourself into another person's work. Like, be able to divorce yourself from the work a little bit and look at it in an objective way. And like, if you have a certain way of writing, or as I mentioned, the way of saying, don't try to impose it into that writer. Like, it's really important to flow with the rhythm of the other person's voice and their narrative, and just understand their story and the intent of their story. Don't try to inject yourself into it. Like, respect the other person's work. Yeah. Like, look at it, know that you're there, but to respect it and just to try to bring it to the best form of itself. And your feedback needs to be a dialogue. There shouldn't be that, power imbalance where the person you're giving feedback to feels that they don't really have a say, but to accept it. It's a dialogue, a conversation. I've had pushbacks, like when I'm editing something and someone pushed something back, and it's a give and take, and you look at it, and the thing, choose your battles. But you can see how the work could be better. But if that particular version is the one that works for your author, then respect that.
Understand. Look, thank you, Eugen. That's really all we have time for today. I want to thank the audience for joining us, and a very big thank you to you again, Eugen, for chatting with us, for sharing your time, your expertise, and the experience of your life. It's been amazing and inspiring. Now, the next First Friday event will be held on Friday, the 6th of September, and our guest will be writer, publisher, and the former director of Writing New South Wales, Angelo Lukakis. Now, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly e-newsletter Newsbite for more information and the link to the RSVP. Thank you for joining us all, and we hope to see you at another Writing New South Wales event soon. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you, Eugen.
See you. Thank you, everybody who was here today.